Bienvenido. Welcome everyone. I wanted to share some of the video I just shot on the trip I recently took to Colombia. I paddled in the area near Medellin. The videos that I'm showing here aren't that interesting. They're of the river Rio Calderas, Rio Santa Domingo, and the Rio Semana, which seem to be like the popular rivers in that area. When I did searches for YouTube videos to try to get some information on the area, these are the ones that popped up. But you know, the videos in themselves are just kind of a background to me talking about my experience down in Colombia, what it was like to travel there, and what kind of paddling opportunities there are down there. I initially started planning a trip to South America after a friend of mine went to Chile and returned and said, you know, we should plan a trip down there. And that was going to be like winter of 2022, 2023 period. After doing a little bit of research into that trip, I realized how expensive it was going to be, how long it was going to take to travel down there. So I did a little bit more research. A friend of mine had been posting some information about Colombia. I knew Colombia had mountains. It turns out that people are kayaking down there. And there's even an outfitter, Expedition Colombia, that runs trips in that area. Last year we went down, my wife and I went down just for 5 days just to explore a little bit, kind of figure out how easy it was to get around, you know, kind of the typical international travel stuff. And then we decided to return this year. My wife doesn't paddle, but I contacted Expedition Colombia and I set up 3 days of paddling with them, and we stayed in their guest house the entire time. It was a great experience. And this beautiful view is from the guest house. It's from the common eating area. That was an outside kitchen with a dining room table in it. Really relaxing to sit in the morning and have coffee, and a great place to sit in the evenings and hang out with some of the other people that were staying at the guest house. The first challenge of the trip was getting to the outfitter and being able to return to Medellin to continue the rest of our vacation. I didn't take a boat or a paddle for this trip, so we just had our suitcases, but we did have to carry all of our luggage out to the guest house and then take it back with us when we went back to Medellin. The year before, we had traveled from Medellin to Guatapé, which is pretty close to where Colombia Expedition's base is, so we had some idea of what the traffic was going to be like. Traffic in Medellin is insane. There's a lot of traffic. The city is like 4 million people, and people sort of only generally obey traffic laws. So I can't imagine driving inside of the city. But once we got into the mountains and the rural areas, it seemed a little bit more manageable. So I thought, you know, I can read Spanish well enough to read the road signs. They drive on the right side of the road. I thought things would be okay. Things were not okay. We had delays getting out of the airport, and it was terrifying. It was foggy. It was in the mountains. It was a 2-lane, you know, typical mountain road, and people were passing in blind corners. A couple of times we came around a corner and had a vehicle facing us. And one time we came around a corner and there was a motorcycle laid down in the middle of the road, and the rider was trying to remount and get out of the way. So as a result of that, we ended up parking the car and not using it anymore, except for one really short, really close trip to get groceries in the local village. The wiser choice would have been to let Colombia Expeditions handle our travel to and from the airport. It was nice to be able to go out for groceries and have a little bit of freedom. We left one afternoon just to go into the local village, get some groceries, and have dinner. But definitely not worth the risk of having that rental car and driving on those local roads. And speaking of local roads, this is footage going down to the put-in for the Rio Santa Domingo. Several encounters with dump trucks like this. So again, whatever the river level was, class 5 shuttle. So just real quick, back to our car rental troubles. I had a similar issue encountering a vehicle on a narrow gravel road while we were going into the guest house, and I ended up denting the bumper of the car. I asked Mael if he could help me find a mechanic so that maybe I could get it fixed a little bit just to avoid the $550 deductible from budget rental. So taking it to this garage, this guy was super cool, super helpful, and he For $5, he fixed the bumper and we avoided any additional charges. And since Colombia Expeditions was so helpful in getting my car fixed, now's a great time to mention them. This is the guide, one of the owners from the trip, Mael, who showed me down the river 2 of the 3 days that I was down there. Colombia Expeditions was great on and off the river. Since this was my first time paddling outside of the United States, I had no idea. Like, I could never have arranged this kind of trip on my own. So I really wanted to go with a guide service that would do the shuttle for me. Expedition Colombia can supply everything if you don't want to take any of your own personal gear. However, I wanted as much of my personal gear as I could manage, but considering some of the other traveling we were going to have to do while we were there, carrying a paddle around was going to be really difficult, and carrying a boat would be impossible. Not to mention the difficulties of trying to take a boat in the plane to get it down there. So I used my own PFD, skirt, and helmet, but borrowed a boat and a paddle. The boat selection was really good. They had maybe a dozen boats to choose from. I ended up paddling 3 different boats during the trip. First day was in a large Scorch, day 2 was a Dagger Phantom, and day 3 was a Jackson Nirvana. I probably would have, rather paddled the same boat the whole time just to get used to it a little bit more, since they were boats I hadn't paddled before. But the large Scorch is a little bit big for me. I didn't really like the Dagger Phantom that much, so I just kept on switching. Finally, the Jackson Nirvana was great, but that was the last day. So maybe when I go back, I'll use that for the rest of the time, unless they get something new. The paddles they had available were Warner Desperados, which is a fiberglass shaft and a plastic blade. Not a great paddle. But then the last day I was there, I ended up being able to get a Warner, I think it was a Sherpa, and that was a better paddle, and that actually helped me feel a little bit better on the water. This is day 3 on the water, and as usual for me, I'm horrible at remembering electronics, so I left my GoPro behind at the guest house, and consequently I missed footage from the lower section of the Rio Calderas and the Rio Samana. This was the long stay on the river for us. It was about a 24-mile trip, but even though the water wasn't high, it was a pretty quick flowing river, and we were on the water only for about 3.5 hours. So this is day 3 on the water. Early in the morning, Mail wasn't going to take me paddling this day. It was one of their other guides, Jean. He suggested we go out to a class 4 section of river that was a little bit more difficult. I wasn't feeling very good about the day before, so I just decided to go back to the Rio Calderas. Ended up being a pretty good decision. We would have been on low water on the more difficult piece. Instead, we got big water on the Calderas. A couple of those class 4 rapids got really fun, and the run in general got a lot more fun, a lot more playways, just a lot more water moving through it. And it's cool to see rivers at different water levels to see how they change. We also had to deal with getting the car repaired today. So the Calderas is a really short section. I think we were on the water for about an hour this day, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, and that even included some time scouting the first big rapid to check for trees, so we could get off pretty quick. And I kind of have always had the impression that when you paddle down in South America or Central America, that everything's going to be a long commute. Again, I don't have any experience with this, but here at least, like the rivers that we did, and I'm sure this is why these are the ones that you see the most videos for, that people seem to be doing the most when they go to Colombia, is that the shuttles were all pretty easy. This particular one, you take off underneath a bridge, it's right on the road, so it's as easy as anything that I paddle here in the States. And speaking of shuttles, day 2, as I mentioned before, was a long day on the water, or longest day on the water. And the shuttle was the longest too. But it only took about 45 minutes to get in, and about 2 hours to come back out afterwards. So, again, kind of comparing it to some of the shuttles in the United States, it wasn't horrible. And the takeout from the Rio Samana was cool. It was in the town of San Luis. There was a little restaurant there at the takeout, a restaurant that seems to be taking advantage of the whitewater industry. They serve traditional Colombian food. It was a beautiful day. We had to wait a little while for a raft trip to get off the river since we were sharing shuttle with them. So we got to hang out in the sun and have a few beers before heading back to the guest house. That restaurant was also open air, like most restaurants in Colombia, and I think that's worth mentioning because it points out the fact that the weather is always beautiful here. So coming to paddle, you're in a shorty. The water's warm, the air's warm. It's fantastic. We took this picture right after we got off the river in front of the mural that was painted on the side of the restaurant. On the left, that's JC. I'm one of the other guides. Mal's in the middle, and I'm on the right. On a final note, I'd kind of like to talk about just, sort of the non-paddling aspect of traveling in Colombia. Like any third world country, I think it probably has its dangers. We've been fortunate enough not to experience those dangers, with the exception of the traffic. And everybody we met was really kind and welcoming. Helped with a language barrier, helped us find things from the people in the grocery store that helped us navigate through some packaging that was unfamiliar with us, to the mechanic that helped me work on my car. Everybody contributed to help make it a great experience. I'll definitely be returning next year. Hopefully next year, one, I'll be able to take my own paddle. I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. And I hope I'll get on maybe a few more rivers and get back to some of these rivers that I paddled this time. Thanks everybody for watching. Don't hesitate to comment and let me know if you have any questions or want any more information about the trip and Expedition Colombia.